Today is Monday, January the 24th, 2022, and the mask is indicative of the time of the COVID virus, which has affected the United States and the world for the better part of 2 years. But we're in the apartment of Mart Hill at the Grove at Canopy here in Tallahassee. My name is Lynn McLarty, and I'm a member of the Trinity Historical Society of Trinity United Methodist Church, and the videographer is Rex Adams, the longtime director of communications at Trinity, who a phone call to him asking him to do this for us today, he readily agreed to do it. So Rex, I thank you for coming out of retirement and doing this really important interview with our good friend Mart Hill. Mart, we thank you for sharing your life and your association with Trinity with this interview today.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I'd like to start with your telling us your beginnings of your birth and the steps taken to come to Tallahassee, and whatever comes to mind, it's open. There's no script today for you to share with us.
Okay, Lynn, I was born in South Carolina, but that was only because in those days girls went home to Mama to have their babies. Mother was already married and living in Tallahassee, but I was born in South Carolina and then came back home when Mother thought it was proper to bring me. But I've belonged to Trinity ever since I can remember. It's the only church I've ever belonged to, and it's the only one I want to belong to, I'll have to say.
Will you give us your birthday?
I was born August the 2nd, 1920.
In where? In where in South Carolina?
In Greenwood, South Carolina.
Okay, tell the story, please, of your mother and dad's meeting. Your mother, why she was in Tallahassee.
My mother had a cousin who was governor of Tallahassee, Governor Gilchrist, and governor of Florida, I should say. And he was a bachelor. But his mother, Mrs. Gibbs, would, every time the legislature met, would move to Tallahassee and open the governor's mansion and entertain the legislature. The rest of the year, Governor Gilchrist lived in a bachelor apartment. So she would, his mother would bring a lot of her nieces to come help entertain. So that's where she met Daddy. He was working at P.W. Wilson and Company, which is an old-time store in Tallahassee, no longer in existence. But that's where she met him.
Did you have siblings that were born in South Carolina also?
I had one brother, and he was born in South Carolina just because Mama always went home to Mama to have the babies. And also she had two old maid sisters who just covered over the babies and took so much time with us that she had a hard time coming back to Tallahassee.
So she would make the trip, being in her later stage of pregnancy, in those days, the 20s, in a Model T, something like that.
The train.
The train, okay.
They would go to Thomasville and catch a train and go to Atlanta, change trains in Atlanta. And the train that she took to Atlanta went up to Greenville, and it went right in front of her old home. So, and there was a store, not right at the house, but way away. But it was commercial, so the train would stop to deliver packages to the store, and so that's the plane I got off of as a baby.
Would your father travel with her?
No.
She would go by herself?
He had to work. Oh, he would take her and then come right back.
And come back, okay.
But he had to work.
The train from Tallahassee to Thomasville to Atlanta?
No, they had to get to Thomasville by...
Oh, had to go by car?
By car.
Okay. Good story. Okay. Then you grew up, and your brother's younger than you are?
No, he was 6 years older.
Okay, so the pattern was set for you to be born in South Carolina,
That's
just
right.
like your brother was born.
Well, in those days, girls always went home to mama to have the babies, and for good reason. They had a lot of help, a lot of help.
And your parents were married then in South Carolina?
Yeah,
Okay.
in their home.
In their home. And then so your brother and you grew up in Tallahassee,
Oh, yeah.
and when were your first recollections of being a member of Trinity and the activities that Trinity that were open for
I
individuals?
can't tell you exactly when, but my main memory is, and I've told you this story before, Lynn, is that all the children of the church would meet together on Sunday morning. We would all meet together and have a program, and then we would go into the age group Sunday school class. And we always had to have a Bible verse handy. And everybody had to say their Bible verse. And when I said mine one day, I said, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gossip," to the utter mortification of my older brother who was sitting there. But also another funny thing, a lot of children always said Jesus wept. Well, we knew that's because they hadn't learned their verse. That's the only verse they knew. So Sunday school was really fun.
Mart, do you remember there being partitions in the main sanctuary there that the Sunday school rooms met?
The Sunday school, I remember that vaguely, Lynn, but the one I remember the best is we met in the basement. And then we'd go into little alcoves in the basement.
For different age groups?
Yeah,
Okay.
the age groups. We were divided into age groups after the general meeting.
Okay. So you are a graduate of Leon High School?
Yeah. And that
What year?
1937 and a half. In those years, for some reason, they would let children skip grades. And I skipped a grade, like in the 6th grade. So I had to graduate in the mid-year. They had midterm graduations. I had graduation in June and in January. And it was just a great mess because there was nothing to do from January to June.
So Mart, the time that you are associating yourself and you remember the Sunday school room and how you would divide up, then your teenage years were in Tallahassee before you went off to college after you graduated in 37 and a half. Will you name some of these people that may be fresh on our minds?
Well, my best friend was Helen Osley.
Helen, yes.
And her family was all members of Trinity. Even her grandparents must have been Saxon. For years they were fixtures.
George
Washington Saxon.
G.W.
Yeah. And she was my best friend. And neither of our mothers could drive a car. So she and I had to catch rides with people. And we had a lot of good friends whose parents would take us around. But Mother and Miss Bessie, we called Miss Osley, they just couldn't drive.
They just never took the interest to it, or they?
I can't tell you that.
Okay.
But I think it's probably a good idea because they were both very loquacious people. They talked a lot and cute and funny, and they probably would not have been as good a drivers as they would need to be.
Tell us who Helen Osley married.
Helen Osley married Ben Willis, who came to be a fine member of our church.
The judge.
He was from Quincy, but he came to, when they got married, he was practicing law in Tallahassee. And he taught the Wesley Fellowship class for years. Real good teacher.
He rose to be a prominent judge.
Yep.
Yep.
That's right.
Yes, yeah. So.
And I'm trying to think of, and of course all the Osley children were members of the church, but when various ones married, they went with their husbands or wives.
Okay, Helen is one. Do you have any others that you'd like to bring up now? Did anyone go off to college with you from Tallahassee? Were you that close to anyone that maybe?
Well, I roomed with Helen the freshman year.
And where were you at that, your freshman year?
In Tallahassee, of course, at FSCW.
Okay.
We didn't know there was another college possible. You had to go to FSCW. And we're thrilled to death to go, but we did live on the campus. And I loved every minute. And I lived on the campus 4 years. Helen moved home after 1 year, and then she got married after 2 years. But I lived at that 4 years.
Were you in a sorority at FSCW?
Yeah. Want me to tell you which one?
You can whisper or you can say it with
No,
pride.
I was an AD Pi.
An AD Pi, yes, yes.
A lot of Tallahassee girls were at that particular time.
I don't know if it's proper to now to tell you, but the AD Pi chapter bestowed upon you some unique recognition, didn't they, in the recent times? Did they put a plaque up or something like that up down on Pensacola Street or something like the house? Or I'm not sure what I'm talking about.
Lynn, I'm not sure what you're talking
Okay,
about.
okay.
I know you're right about something, but I can't quite
Okay.
remember what it was.
So the time of what you went to FSCW, and then you went to Maryland.
Went to the University of Maryland and went there to help establish an AD Pi chapter at a new school. And they already had a house, and that was nice. But Maryland was very exciting because College Park was just outside of Washington, almost like a suburb of Washington. We could take a train in there, and you get so interested in everything that was going on, you know, with the war effort. So at the end of that year, I went to work for American Airlines in Washington, and to be in an exciting place. Washington was thrilling. It was scary, but it was thrilling, you know, to be in the middle of this huge war.
So we're talking 41, 42, something like that.
42, 43.
So tell us the job that you had with American Airlines.
Well, I really worked in a very low-grade capacity. Was in, to begin with, just worked filling the planes with people, working in reservations.
What planes were they flying then?
DC-3.
DC-3s.
Yeah, I think that was about the only one, and there weren't too many of them. And people had to fly on a certain class. Priority. And like the White House was priority 1, and other things 2, and went on down. The funniest experience I had in having to remove people was one time they had, President Roosevelt always had the president's birthday ball. It was a money raiser for various defense volunteer organizations. Roosevelt was president at that time. So they had the president's birthday ball, and they flew all these stars in. And the morning that they were supposed to go back to Hollywood, a contingent of young flyers had to come and go to Hollywood to pick up planes that were going to the war effort. So of course they had priority. So my job was to call up to all the movie stars and say, sorry, you know, we regret this, but it happens to everybody. And I talked to Walter Pidgeon. I'd just seen him in this wonderful movie, and I thought, he was the meanest thing to me. I was so mad I couldn't stand it. And then the next one I got was Bing Crosby, and he was just darling. Don't mind a tall honey, Tallahassee. I mean, Washington just as good as Hollywood any time. He was just darling. I wanted to keep him on the phone. But anyhow, you have little incidents like that were kind of interesting.
So you those intervening years, you stayed with American Airlines until you came back to Tallahassee?
To get married.
Okay, tell us your meeting Lou Sr., if you will share some of that with us, and then because ultimately you got married at Trinity
Yeah.
in 1944.
Lewis was called into the Army quite early. He had a reserve commission from Florida. So he was called into the Army early, before we even got in the war, when we began to get organized though, because we all knew it was inevitable that we were going to have to get into it. And so, having gotten in so early, he was always one of the first ones to have to go overseas. He was always told, now whether this is true or not, I don't know, that he was on the first boat that left the West Coast after Pearl Harbor. But I know he did say that all the way in the Pacific, they kept waiting for the convoy to pick them up. They were just this one little ship. They didn't know the destruction at Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
It was not known how bad it was. So they went all the way across to the South Pacific unaccompanied, landed in New Caledonia. Then he was there for 2 years. Then came back, and that's when we got married.
But you had to develop a relationship before he left to go to
Yeah,
the Pacific.
yeah.
Were you waiting for him?
No. Sorry. Sorry you asked that. I was not waiting.
Okay, but did he came back and on leave? Is that when you got married? Obviously the war was not over in 44.
Oh, heavens no. No, he came back on leave. And of course, he had had hepatitis and malaria. So he was physically in bad shape. Looked awful. But anyhow, we decided to get married. And we got married then. And then he went to a school in Meridian, Mississippi. A ground liaison school where the artillery officers were taught to call in to the air officers, tell them where to bomb and who to bomb. So he went to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was sent to Germany. And he was in Germany when the war ended. It ended pretty soon after that.
Wow.
But by that time I was expecting a baby, so I was home with my mama and daddy anyhow.
That's right. Lou was born in 46.
46.
46.
Whatever. don't
Wasn't
fool me with
I think
color
so.
with numbers.
The dates,
Lynn.
okay.
Don't
I
bother me
think
with
Lou and I are
numbers.
born the same year, but it may be off. But then after the war, he came home, and then what transpired for his employment?
Well, when he first came home, his father owned the ice plant. In those days, we used ice.
Was
You
it
know-
called Hill Ice Company?
No, it was the Middle Florida Ice Company, and it had been owned by the Lively family. They owned that and the Coca-Cola family, but then the Coca-Cola company. But then they decided just to have the Coca-Cola company, so Mr. Hill took over the ice company. So Lewis worked in that for 3 or 4 years.
His daddy took it over, and then Lou Senior worked for his dad.
Yeah.
In the ice company. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And then later sold it. And when he was in the ice business, he was named the officer of a new bank that was getting started. It was the People's Bank. And he eventually became president of the People's Bank. He sold the ice company and moved over there.
And that's where he spent the rest of his
Mm-hmm.
working days.
Yeah.
And then, okay. After the children were born, Lou and Almina, do you remember that you're being a parent to them and their activities at Trinity? Because they were bordering then tearing down the old church and building the new one in their teenage years.
Yeah, I remember them going on Sunday night to young folks. You know, that's, well, I hate to admit it, but they were going just for, not my children alone, but they went for the social part of it. But so what?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to the church for your
It's a good place to
social,
be.
that's good. Good for the church and good for you.
Yes, yes.
So that was our church activities on Sunday night. I forgot, we had a name for it and I can't remember what it was. But the Baptist...
NYF? Is that?
I guess that.
NYF,
But the Baptist had had a Sunday night.
BTU, the Baptist Training Union, the BTU.
Well, they seemed to have more fun than everybody, so we'd visit every now and then. We'd skip Methodist on Sunday night and go over to the Baptist to see what they were doing.
I'm going to regress just a little bit and have you bring us through your years in Tallahassee and at the church during the Depression. You would be a mid-teenager born in 20, you would be in 32, 33, you were 12, 13 years old. Any recollections of the community, Tallahassee?
Well, I can remember Mother and Daddy talking about how they had to reduce their spending, or how they had to start cutting down on everything, because the Depression was in full blow then. My daddy worked at the P.W. Wilson Company, which was a large, at that time, a large department store in Tallahassee. And I know that we had to cut down with everything, and Mother had a maid that, and this sounds ridiculous, her regular salary was $6 a week. But evidently she could live off of it because that's what they were paying. But I remember they had to reduce Annie $1 a week. Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, those are the
But
times.
that's the most I remember about the Depression hitting me. I never wanted for anything, I'll have to admit, thankfully.
How about integration? Will you comment, or do you care not to, of the late 50s and the early
Lynn,
60s?
this sounds ridiculous, but I cannot remember anything that I had anything to do with about integration.
Okay.
It evidently did not strike me too much in any way because I don't remember anything. Don't remember doing anything about it.
How about, but and you don't remember how the people at Trinity reacted to, because Tallahassee was the center of so many movements then for.
Well, I do know that there were
integration.
one or two very prominent members of Trinity that walked out when a black person came to the church. And that caused a little bit of a stir. I was not there at the time, but...
Was Dr. James the minister then, or do you remember who,
I don't remember.
who was in the pulpit then? Okay.
You know, the years run into each other, Lynn. I can't separate just exactly when anybody was anywhere.
Tell me about the military guys in Tallahassee during the war, and how, being at FSCW, the activities that went on, because the guys were probably hovering over the university from the guys from
over the girls' school.
Over the girls' school, and they were
Yeah.
from Count Gordon Johnston and from
Dale Mabry.
Dale Mabry, yes.
Oh, the girls were having a grand time. You know, there were, about 1,900 girls out there. And it got so you'd see uniforms walking around the campus, and old people were just very excited about that. I well remember when Pearl Harbor happened, I was in the library writing a term paper on Robert Browning. And the door of the library flew open and some girls screamed, "The Japs have bombed Pearl Harbor." So of course then the whole campus went crazy. Dr. Campbell was the president, and he had just come. And they had to almost literally lock the girls in the dormitories. They were afraid that they'd try to go home, or they didn't know what they might do. So they told them why they were doing it, of course. But it was really sort of a lockdown.
So they were trying to control the girls so they wouldn't be on the highway, or?
Well, they were scared they'd go home, just leave school. They were,
and not come back.
and
Right.
they didn't know what.
They didn't know.
They didn't know how upset people would be. Only one girl left school, and several did sort of get upset, but they had counselors come in and work with them. But it was kind of, for a girls' school, and with girls being away from home, it was sort of dicey for a little while. But Dr. Campbell handled everything just beautifully.
Do you have any stories of those stalwarts that were at Trinity, your interactions with those? You talked about Helen and Judge Ben, but any others that were at Trinity that were your contemporaries that you remember associating with during service to Trinity during those years?
I really can't think of it. I tell you, a married couple that are standing in my mind were Mr. and Ms. O.C. Collins. They were both very active in our church.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why I can't particularly, but it doesn't come to mind.
How about your association with Frank and Frank Moore? We talked about him earlier, about being such a driven person on Trinity. He was Mr.
Well, Frank
Trinity.
and Beth both. They were just wonderful members of Trinity. And of course, I was just a child to them, even during college. But Beth always, she was just a force of nature. You know, she's one that something needed to be done, Beth did it. There was no question about needing it. If they needed it, she did it. And Frank was a wonderful member too. You know, they gave one of the stained glass windows, Frank and Beth.
Okay.
The big ones in the church.
One of the big tall ones.
Mm-hmm.
Of the three, they gave one of them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. What, do you have any advice or sage advice to what's coming at Trinity, or what you would like to leave our audience today with your life and what you've seen and what future you think Trinity has?
I wouldn't dare say much about that. All I would say is be sure and go to church and support the church whenever they need it. The churches now, I think, need it as bad as they've ever needed it. Because there's so many distractions that there was something that I thought I wanted to tell you about. Well, I won't take this time to worry. It was a funny story about, I know, the thing about, I told you all about in church getting up and saying, go ye into all the world and spread the gospel. Well, one other time when we were all in there, my brother got up right then and said, shut up, Mart. He was so embarrassed he couldn't stand it. And but when we had to say the Bible verses, that's what I was thinking of. We were all supposed to have one every Sunday. But half the people would say, Jesus wept. So we knew that one had not studied. Did not know that. Oh, I know the story I wanted to tell you. My mother had a wonderful sense of humor. She was deeply religious. But her religion made her happy, and she made other people happy. But I took tap dancing and toe dancing, and a delegation of women from our church in their white gloves and hats called on my mother to object to the fact that she allowed her daughter, a Methodist, to dance, and in public being Lynn High School. And Mother said, ladies, I appreciate very much you all coming here. And Mart is a Methodist, but Mart's feet belong to the Episcopal Church.
Her feet belong to the Methodist, to the Episcopal Church. Yeah, okay. Mart, there's a room at the church, and I'd like for you to expand on this idea that I'm bringing up. The trustee room, and it has your name on it. There's a plaque there at one of the doors in the conference room at the church now. Will you tell how that came about?
Lynn, I honestly can't. I know that Lewis paid some money for that room, and that's why he had to put it in
Lewis
my name.
Senior, your husband.
Lewis Senior.
Your husband, okay.
Yeah, he had been raised a Baptist, but he joined the Methodist Church with me. But he gave that, and I don't think the any details except he just wanted to do something solely in my honor at the church.
Well, there is a plaque on the wall.
Yeah.
In that room that it brings to mind that the others can go by and look at it and see your name as it will be lasting part of Trinity.
Yeah, well, that was Lewis, and he paid I don't know whether it's to furnish, whatever it was, he paid for that room to be finished and furnished.
Mm-hmm. It was in your honor.
Mm.
Yeah, well, good.
Yeah.
Anything else? We're so indebted to you for spending time with Rex and me today and telling your life and your association with Trinity and with Tallahassee. Do you have any story kind of off the wall?
Well, all I can say is I think everybody should be associated with the church. You don't have to be a white-collar religion to be a good Christian and to enjoy your church. I believe in enjoying your church, and I think you can. The women's societies that we have are fun. You know, you meet once a month and you have a nice meeting with conversation with members of the church. I just think everybody needs a church in their lives.
Well, thank you again for letting us come into your home and let you express yourself today.
I'm just happy to be with you.
We love you and God bless.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.